2 days after the lavish and grand parade, its scenes continued to reverberate around the world. On September the 3rd, the long-awaited V-Day parade took place in the center of Beijing, and I was there. The event was held to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War. Leaders of 26 countries and senior representatives from other countries attended the commemoration covering 5 continents. Now, soldiers marched in near-perfect synchronization, and new advanced weaponry was unveiled, including intercontinental missiles, drones, robot wolves, and latest generation of fighter jets. As China showcased its growing military capabilities, President Xi Jinping reminded the world that humanity faces a choice between peace and war, and emphasized that China will always remain committed to the path of peaceful development. So what did the parade say about China's position in the world? What messages did China manage to convey, and why is it still important now, 80 years on, to remember the hard-won victory and sacrifices made during the Second World War? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Moscow by Andrey Kortunov, former academic director of the Russian International Affairs Council; from Beijing by Zoon Ahmed, a Pakistani researcher and journalist at the Center for China and Globalization; and last but not least, here in the studio, Victor Gao, chair professor at Soochow University. The warmest welcome to all of you. Let me go to Andrey first. Did you watch the parade on TV or on your phone? What is your number one impression?
Well, let me say that, of course, it was very early in Moscow, but I'm sure that I was not the only one in Russia to watch the parade. And I have to say that I do not regret spending some time very early in the morning to do it, because it was definitely a very impressive display of the Chinese military might, and I would say unexpected, because it's not typical to see such parades in Beijing. And of course, in terms of the new technologies demonstrated here, and the level of professionalism of the uniformed men and women, that was clearly a very clear signal to everybody, indicating the new level of the Chinese combat and military readiness.
Well, one detail that's overlooked by a lot of people was when President Xi Jinping, together with his foreign counterparts, ascended the Tiananmen rostrum, and they greeted the veterans, some aged over 100. And in his speech to the world, President Xi also thanked the heroes, the fallen soldiers, and the veterans. And he also thanked, interestingly, foreign governments and individuals who stood by the Chinese people in its war of resistance against the Japanese aggression. Victor, what is being said and told to the world through these fine details, especially foreign governments?
Yes, indeed. I was in the CGTN studio doing the live commentary throughout the parade, and I was deeply impressed. My breath was taken away again and again and again. I think while China fought against the Japanese aggressors for a totality of 14 years, starting from 1931 all the way to victory in 1945, China was joined by the United States and eventually also by the Soviet Union in the final victory against Japanese aggressors. And throughout the 14-year period, China benefited tremendously from many international persons, including, for example, Dr. Norman Bethune from Canada, who has become a household name, and also
Americans as well.
Right?
And
the Flying Tigers and the General Chennault, and also General Stilwell, for example, who worked with China in the fight against the Japanese aggressors in Myanmar and elsewhere, for example, as well as the Doolittle Raiders who bombed Tokyo, and they need to continue their flight westward, and many of them crash landed in China, including in the Japanese occupied areas.
Indeed, a lot of countries who fought Nazi Germany, for instance, or who fought Japanese militarist aggressors elsewhere in Asia were also highlighted throughout the event. Khan, let me go to you. From your perspective, what did you pick up from the whole commemoration?
Well, first of all, I agree with both what Andre and Victor Gao said. It was a display of, Chinese strength, how far China has come, and also a tremendous display of the discipline with which, the precision with which the parade was conducted. I'll also mention here a lot of my family lives in different continents of the world. And in all of our group chats, they were sharing videos on videos. And I'm talking about people who don't necessarily follow Chinese developments. But this parade, the way it was done, made rounds globally, not just on media, but also social media. And people were
Why is
deeply
that,
interested.
Zoon?
And we learned a lot. The way it was done, I mean, really, it was so impressive. It looked unreal in some ways. It looked like it was out of a video game, literally some of the comments that my family was making. And they're just watching. And I think it's also a moment for us to recognize that World War II was not just fought in Europe. Increasingly, with China's display and with the way, like you mentioned, President Xi mentioned the contributions of other countries. I myself, whenever I've traveled to different cities, I was in Nanjing last year, and there was so much recognition, commemoration, and respect for all of those foreigners who fought this war side by side with the Chinese. There is a realization. On the one hand, this is a display of how far the Chinese nation has come. It was an emotional display, really watching the parade. I think a lot of people felt so many emotions, how much those people suffered, as Victor mentioned, in 14 years. But at the same time, this is a realization, a moment for the world to recognize that it was all of us, Asians, who also sacrificed so much during World War II. So I think that's a very important aspect, and that also conveys a very important message, which President Xi also mentioned in his speech, that we need to, think of the world as a collective. The idea that we need to think of the global community.
Yeah.
All nations must unite in order to make sure that we don't fall into that dangerous cycle of fascism and imperialism once again. So
it's interesting, Zoon. Sorry for interrupting here. As you mentioned, President Xi actually sent multiple layers of messages, I would say. For instance, in his address on Tiananmen Rostrum, he said that today he draw the parallel between what happened 80 years ago to today, and he said humanity again has to choose between peace and war, dialogue and confrontation, win-win organization, win-win cooperation, and zero-sum game. We will remain committed to the path of peaceful development and join hands with all peoples around the world in building a community with a shared future for humanity. Andre, why do you think he sees it important to mention this up front before people sees the display of military prowess?
Well, there is a lot of pessimism around the world about the future of the international system, and many politicians and scholars argue that we live not in the post-World War world, but rather in a pre-World War world. That sooner or later, but we will have a major military conflict, which might turn out to be lethal for all of us. And it is very important to get a signal of optimism that we're not doomed to get into another cycle of military confrontation. We're not destined to burn in the fire of a nuclear war. It ultimately depends on all of us, whether we have the wisdom, whether we have the commitment, whether we are dedicated to maintaining peace. And of course, Chairman Xi made it very clear that China will do what it has to do in order to prevent such conflict from erupting. I think it was a very powerful signal, and I think that now people might feel a little bit better about their future, not just in China, but also in other countries as well.
This is really interesting that you are saying this, because some people are seeing it completely the opposite. Despite President Xi also stressing that China shall speed up the building of a world-class military. Of course, this is what China strives to do and firmly safeguard China's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. All service members should provide strategic support for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and make greater contributions to the peace and development of the world. Victor, see, China is going to build a world-class, very strong army to defend itself for all, it's all understandable. But how will China's growing military power contribute to world peace and development? Because some people are trying to spin it the other way around and say, look, China is a threat and it's not shy about making it public.
Well, 2 points. One is that I truly believe that history will look back at this grand military parade as the most important military parade in human history, because it marks a turning point. Beyond this turning point, China will be generally recognized as a very advanced military power, at least on a par with the other big power, if not more superior than it in many other areas. Mainly because China has managed to produce the most sophisticated weapons, which will enable China to completely deter and completely defeat any attempted military attacks on China, conventional weapon or military weapon. Now, the more important message I see is peace. Why? Because with all these military wherewithals, China can defend the peace. Defending peace for China itself.
These are the directed energy weapon that we're seeing a lot of discussion on it. But some people are saying, look, you have all of these weapons, you're going to use it. It's natural. And probably for offensive reasons, Zoon. How do you counter that kind of argument? Because people do, right?
Yeah, I think the real tragedy is that we have been in this, worldview, the way international relations ideas have been constructed by an Anglo-Saxon world. It's hard for many people to even conceive what a world without alliances, without a zero-sum mindset, without a powerful country that's trying to just dominate other countries endlessly looks like. What they don't realize is that China's perspective is very long-term. And even like you mentioned in President Xi's speech, and another part that I'll quote, where he recognizes that we as humanity rise and fall together. We know that we prosper and perish together. And China has only focused on pragmatic development. China has focused on the Belt and Road Initiative, the Shanghai Spirit, on collaborations, on cooperation, on pushing us, as the global majority and anyone else who wants to participate, to recognize that the threats we face are collective. And the truth is, without having this kind of military capability, actually we are leaving ourselves very vulnerable and susceptible. We know what happens to countries that are not able to defend itself. We are still living in a world where the powerful countries treat it as the law of the jungle, the rule of the jungle. They see themselves as above international law. Just 2 days prior, again, at the SCO and the SCO Plus meeting, again, President Xi emphasized that we all must respect the UN Charter and focus on development goals. So I think the messaging that China has done in the last few days, over years as well as China's actions, show that China is not an aggressor. China is a country that will defend humanity's right to development. China is a country that will use its, capabilities to further advance the common goals that we have.
Yeah.
And
Victor,
I feel those that are constantly doubting. Yeah.
Sorry, Victor, you wanted to chip in here.
Yes, absolutely. When you talk about other countries or other views about the Chinese military parade, I was shocked the other day by what was said by the foreign minister of EU, foreign affairs head, Madame Callas. She said the victory parade held in Beijing is a challenge to international order. Allow me to use this occasion to tell her, where is international order without China? Confronting China is confronting world order. Confronting China, challenging China, is a direct challenge to international order. China fought the longest and sacrificed the most in defeating fascism. And if China did not continue the fight, the Japanese fascism and Nazi Germany would have united hands in crushing Soviet Union, and there would be no way to reverse the Nazi occupation of everywhere in Europe. And the world would be lost if China didn't continue to fight. So I would tell Madam Callas, wake up to the reality, study history, and know how China fought for your survival, fought for the international order we live through. China is the most important and most consequential force, defending peace and defending free trade. That is the megatrend of the world of today.
Andrey, listening from your end, what would you like to add? Because it is not just about weaponry. It is not just about thanking or honoring the fallen heroes, but really about where to go from here, especially when this parade comes on the heels of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, where China again raised a new initiative on global governance. All of these combined together, what is the challenge China is highlighting, and what is the direction China is pointing to, and is that going to be the right direction for the world to go down, given the kind of reactions we're seeing in some Western capitals?
Well, it's clear that the world is becoming multipolar. And the parade that we all observed is yet another manifestation of this multipolarity in the military field. The United States and the NATO alliance can no longer dominate the military agenda, and they'll have to live with it. They will have to accept it sooner or later. It might take time. I think that for some time the United States will still insist of its unquestionable military superiority, and they will try to downplay the China's achievements in the military field. But the world is changing. The question is how to manage this multipolarity. You know, it might turn into a confrontation, but it might turn into multilateral systems which can secure security not only in Asia but the whole world. So I think that the parade is just another indicator of this trend, and this trend might be a slow one, but it is not going to be stopped by anyone.
Zoon, let me go to you once again. What do you think is going to be the great changes from this day on? I mean, it's not a overnight shift. China has been sending these messages all along, consistent message, and the other countries that are joining the, the global South, the global majority, however you want to term it, have been sounding the same calls. So will the speed of action pick up pace from today on? What do you think will be the changes as we move forward?
I think, there's so much to unpack on this. First of all, absolutely, the global South, global majority, the previously peripheral so-called regions of the world, we have always recognized that our autonomy, our right to be treated as equals, our perspectives need to be highlighted. What we have now is the capability under multilateral systems, under obviously with China's success, which is unprecedented in human history. We are seeing that now increasingly we have the ability to come together and put our priorities on the agenda, uphold the international system, the actual international order. We are no longer going to simply, follow what the so-called West or these powers are telling us. But we need to understand that in the end, our collective, our ability to come together, to set priorities straight, to work for peace matters. What I think is, I'll take on Andrei's point, and I think that sort of responds to the question that you also just asked. We are seeing both increased multilateralism, strengthening of global governance, as you also mentioned with the Global Governance Initiative, which is what the majority of the world's people and governments support. And at the same time, we are seeing a system that is becoming increasingly outdated, a resort to confrontation. And I think if those countries that have become accustomed to dominating the majority do not stop, trying to continue that path, they will become irrelevant sooner or later. The only way for the West to remain relevant is if it recognizes that China, the developing countries, global south are here to stay. We have dynamism. We have our own institutions now. We want to uphold global governance. We just want better lives for our people. We refuse unilateralism and we reject a
Yeah.
war mindset, a zero sum mindset.
Yeah,
So I
Victor.
think this is the direction we're going in. Yeah.
Yeah, Victor, in what fashion will the group of developing countries approach the changes they want to see?
Well, first of all, allow me to mention one very important point. As a matter of fact, the international order established back in 1945 upon the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany and Japanese fascism was meant to be multipolar to start with. Just look at the United Nations and the Security Council of the United Nations and the 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power. That means no single country was allowed to dictate its terms to the rest of the world. No single country can dominate the Security Council of the United Nations. And with this multipolarity and multilateralism to start with, being the founding cornerstone of the United Nations back in 1945, throughout the subsequent decades, of course, one country, one bloc thought they could play the role of overlord or emperor, for example. They can hold a gun at the heads of other countries. No, China will not allow.
But what's
Deep
the future
South will
is
not,
China
Global
painting?
South will not allow that.
What future does China have in mind for the world? Will the United Nations be at the core of it, but will a better version of the United Nations and the system be at the core of the vision that China and other developing countries want?
I think the United Nations will remain at the core, even though it was bullied and pushed to the sideline by some bullying country once for a while. But the United Nations remains the only viable international organization which can rally all the countries around it, building peace and repelling war. And China will be the most consequential force, defending peace, promoting free trade, not only for China's sake, but for mankind's sake. So this will be the future that I'm dreaming of, and this will be the future which will descend upon mankind as a whole.
You know, the parade actually did got some reactions from across the Pacific in the White House, for instance. There are some acknowledgement of what went on, but also there were second guessing of the intentions behind it. For instance, that some countries are, you know, conspiring against the United States. Of course, that's what I'm talking about. And that, you know, there are these intention to, again, replace, to dominate, to Andrey, all the familiar talking points. Meanwhile, the United States is seeming in a competition to revitalize its military, for instance, by suggesting to change the name of the Department of Defense into the Department of War, and the talk of developing more weaponry, not for defensive purposes, but for aggressive purposes and more vigorous weaponry. Andrey, in the near future, what are we going to see in terms of the dynamics of great power relationship?
Well, I think it is clear that China will not be treated fairly by the West, at least in the foreseeable future. And whatever China does will be used against China. At least they will try to do it. And it's also clear that, unfortunately, we're entering a new cycle of arms race. And the message from Washington, D.C. is very clear. The United States will try to outspend and to outperform its potential adversaries. I think that it's hard to imagine that this administration is ready to demonstrate constraint in its military buildup. However, there is always hope that realism will prevail and that all the major players will try to somehow moderate their military efforts in order to free resources for more constructive and more useful goals. This is what we hope will happen, but I think that the inertia of the current trends, unfortunately, is too powerful to be changed overnight.
Zoon, how do you look at the development in the near future as we see the reaction from some European leaders? Certainly it's one of sour grape, of envy, of mistrust, of desperation. Is China going to allow the situation to go under control, or is China willing to give some time and really let trust, re-find its way between the different capitals, whether it's Eastern or Western countries, so that, we can move together towards the future in a peaceful manner?
I think we all, I mean, especially as developing countries, we don't wake up thinking we want to dethrone the West and dominate the world. We just think about what we can do to make our lives, our people's lives, our regions more peaceful. How can we just be better? This is what I've seen being 10 years in China. This is what a majority of the world's developing countries think about. It is easy to divide and rule in a world where the South isn't able to speak to each other. Now we have more platforms led by China. This is number one. Secondly, as Victor already mentioned, the 1945 order was not it was meant to be a multipolar world order. But I think some Western countries at that time, especially the United States, thought that if they rig the rules, they will be able to remain at a reasonable advantage above the others, and they will be able to continue dominating. But that changed because we have all moved forward, and now we're able to convey ourselves better. And lastly, I think for China, the perspective is again long term. China is
Right.
open to dialogue, open to conversation. We want to strengthen international law. We want to develop further, and that is it. And
Okay.
lastly, I quickly want to mention, our sacrifices cannot be taken for granted. What China sacrificed during 14 years of Japanese aggression must be considered, must be recognized by the world. There must be an official apology.
And the fact that
we are not
and the fact we're
citizens.
celebrating does
Yeah.
not mean that we are not, we're disregarding the sacrifices other people did in terms of helping together, over evil, over narcissism and military imperialism. Victor, how is China going to use its nuclear weapons? What is China's nuclear policy here? Really quick, 30 seconds.
China has declared China will never be the first to use nuclear weapon against any country, and China will never use nuclear weapon against non-nuclear weapon states or non-nuclear weapon regions, and China will use nuclear weapon only as a last resort to retaliate against any country which dares to use nuclear weapon against China. This is the solemn commitment, and this commitment will make the world better and more peaceful.
All right. Well, time will tell, but China has a clean track record, and China is committed to its long-term goal. Once it's said it, it will be done. I have full confidence in that from my personal experience. Anyway, many thanks to my guests, Andrey Kortunov, a former academic director of Russian International Affairs Council, Zoon Ahmed Khan, Pakistani researcher and journalist at the Center for China and Globalization, and here in the studio, Victor Gao, chair professor at Soochow University. Thank you so much for your unique insights.